Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shemeka Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love with my co-host Shemeka Michelle and Wilfred Riley. Joining us this week, we're excited to have Nasim Vatani and Sasha White of the Underground Podcast. Sasha is also the co-founder of Plebity. We will talk about their podcast, the things that they are doing shortly, but first we want to get into the topic. Our first topic is free speech, but want to kind of look at it from a different angle. I know Joe Rogan made some news this week saying that if this cancel culture and woke culture goes on the way it's been going, pretty soon straight white men won't be able to talk. So what do you think about that? And is he right, Will?
Well, I mean, it is kind of funny because I hate cancel culture, but Joe Rogan's getting paid something like $100 million by Spotify to talk. Like, he signed his own deal with Spotify because he wanted to get away from YouTube financially. So I don't think Joe Rogan's going to have any trouble talking. There really are two different conversations here without going on too long. Like, is there a lot of cancellation going on? Yeah. That's not just like a right-wing talking point. Like, I follow NBA basketball, and the Sacramento Kings fired their long-term announcer. I think this guy was a military veteran because he said all lives matter to one of the players. Like, there's a ton of crap like that. Like, J.K. Rowling's name was taken off of school because she said women exist. So that is a thing, this excessive sensitivity in society. Bunch of whining and cringing, you know. But in all seriousness, the flip side of that, though, is that it's not really that hard to express yourself as like a Joe Rogan-style moderate or conservative. It's just not. Like, Joe Rogan has a deal based on him talking.
Well, that's true. But I'm going to go to Shemeka, but I do want to say the point of the $100 million, because I get a lot of that from the people, the comments. I love to read the comments in these articles. People just they go all over the place. And they're not wrong about the facts, but let's be fair. A lot of conservatives, we give liberals a hard time saying, see, we care about the individual, and they don't understand that all they care about is collective. It's like, no, they're smarter than you giving them credit for. They know the difference. They just like to use whichever one they use that suits them, right? So when you talk about things collectively, like a great example would be when Charlemagne was on Bill Maher and they were talking reparations. He was like, yes, we're owed because I'm this part, West African and this, that, and the other. And when Bill Maher said, but you're rich, he was like, well, if you feel I don't deserve it and you want to give it to somebody else. And then Bill Maher said, but I didn't do anything. And a lot of white people said they didn't do anything. And they may not have lived there. He said, well, but the collective white people did this, right? Collective America. But then in this, when Joe Rogan says this, the first comment they want to say is, well, you made $100 million. Well, it's not like he was saying, the 100 millionaire can't talk. He said, general white man is going to be afraid to talk and going to be shouted out of society. So, I mean, I get it because it's true that he's making that much money. So I just think that in this case, he's not really speaking for himself. He's speaking for every man. Would you say?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a chance to just happen you would have made the comment.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, so one of my core points is that I really don't think it's all that hard to make it in America. I feel this way about all the whining on the mostly minority, well, the half minority left. I struggle with terrible oppression from Charlemagne the God. Like, I love your show, but shut up, bro, that's not real. But at the same time, this has to be applied to a lot of this. Like, there's an entire kind of white backlash sector of media with Adam Carolla, Joe Rogan, and so on. It is true, probably, that if you're a white guy from the working class that's in a few specific woke environments, like a college campus, you're going to hear some real nonsense. Like, you're going to have a professor that makes several $100,000 a year telling you about your privilege before you leave class for the day and go do your shift at a steel mill or however you're funding college. But at the same time, I don't think in the majority of situations, like at that steel mill, you'd have very much trouble at all expressing yourself. So I think there are two different problems. One, there is cancel culture in America. But two, that's kind of an offshoot of another problem, which is that everyone whines all the time. And that now seems to have moved over to the white guy side of the fence. Like, no, we're the real victims. Like, bro, I don't know about it. I don't think anyone's shutting Joe Rogan down.
Right. But to be real, it was bound to happen. You whine enough, somebody else is going to come take up that mantle. But you're right, though. But you're absolutely right. Shemeka?
I don't know about for Joe Rogan, but I can see his point. Not just for straight white men, though, but I believe for anybody. I feel like I have been censored unfairly from really being naked and being who I am. I had a video removed from Instagram a few weeks ago for saying that Lil Nas X was a do it in the booty ass nigga. For me, I didn't see that was a problem because there's a whole video on YouTube where there's a guy saying, "You want to do it in my butt, in my butt." So I'm thinking, well, that's how y'all do it, ain't you? Like that's how you do it, right?
So now you trying to get cut the bull
video?
from YouTube.
That's hilarious.
Well, it's because you can edit this, right? And you can
I don't edit
bleep it out.
Shemeka is naked. You can't edit Shemeka.
You can take out "do it in the booty" and just have like a
She said it
calm
7
segment.
times, Will. 7 times.
Have you seen the video? Have you seen the video that's on YouTube where there's a guy and the song is called "What in the Butt," and he's like, what in the butt, and then he breaks it down and he's like, "You want to do it in my butt, in my butt." So I didn't think anything was wrong with me saying that, but apparently when I said it, it was hate speech.
But did you sing it? Did you do it to a melodious tone?
No, I didn't sing it.
Oh, see. That was
actually.
I just said it. And then I thought, well, it can't be because I said the N word because I'm black. I have the N word privilege, So I do feel like I've been censored and I can't really be who I am. So I can kind of feel his pain.
Go ahead, Will, but we got to let our guests speak. But I'm glad I'm glad you're speaking because it's going to give them a little palate cleanser. I would hate to make them follow that. Go.
Yeah, no, just actually, this won't be any better. I actually met that dude in Chicago.
Oh my God.
I was an organizer for the Human Rights Campaign. I was a canvas manager. One of the groups that we did activism for, because this is almost all for profit, but was the Human Rights Campaign, which is a gay rights group. So one of our guys was out there on the street and was like, "Hey, got a minute for gay rights?" And the guy comes up and's like, "You know what I've done for gay rights?" And I said, "No, I don't know you from Adam and Eve. Who are you, bro?" And he goes, "I'm the guy who wrote What in the Butt." And he actually starts singing What in the Butt, which is like a Chicago juke club hit. And yeah, Shemeka's right about the lyrics. The chorus is, "Do you want to do it?" But anyway, so Lil Nas X, I don't know if he's ever made that song or something like that, but that's a real individual. For that matter, I mean, Lil Nas X is gay. I guess they just took offense at that description of a gay man on modern social media. Although
Go ahead.
Lil Nas X recently made a song where he's booty dancing with Satan.
Exactly.
Like, the devil is sitting in a chair and Lil Nas X comes over and gives him a lap dance. And I mean, my first thought was just he's come a long way from Nickelodeon, but I'm very surprised to see that his team are filing censorship claims.
So I won't be mean enough to pick anybody. So which one of our guests want to touch that next?
Well, I'll say something. I like Joe Rogan, and I also hate cancel culture. I don't know that I think he's literally correct here that the next thing we're going to see is white men as a group being not allowed to speak. But I think it's a serious problem that we're seeing right now. I mean, I myself was a victim of cancel culture. I was fired for my tweets. And I think that last year in August, and I was tweeting basically critiques of transgender ideology. So very similar to J.K. Rowling, which you brought up, Will. And I think your point, Will, also about J.K. Rowling, about Joe Rogan being not necessarily silenced himself, but speaking on behalf of other people who are silenced. that's kind of how I see the J.K. Rowling thing. People attacked her like, you're just some millionaire living in your castle in Scotland. You know, what do you care? Or what does this hurt you to be canceled like this? But I think the point is that it does send a message to people who are watching who might have the same opinion or even just want to talk about it similarly, and they are now being told you're going to face these consequences, you're going to be deemed a social pariah. And I think that's what's really dangerous here, because it almost becomes this form of thought control where people start to conform and self-censor just to avoid that treatment.
Nasim?
I would say one of the dangerous things about it is the fact that it seems to be enabling a culture of doxing people, and I don't think anyone's thinking about that, because I just like about a month ago I got as well. A guy tried to dox me, so it was rather interesting because he was looking for anything he could find to try to dox me, and I think that's part of this. They're really like reading that Newsweek article where they're talking about Joe Rogan. They're basically the comments back to him was basically, "You are a white man. You don't have any reason to talk." There's a idea of collectivized. All white people need to shut up so that minority individuals can speak. But how do you address that? That's a really weird thing, and it reminds me of like the argument itself reminds me of the argument that the Serbs made when they were in the 1990s when they were enacting the genocide in Bosnia, where they said all these people they are guilty of what has happened 500 to 600 years ago, and now you have this slow argument of these people are responsible for what their ancestors did. So I think that the danger of this is not necessarily that it might affect people's jobs. I think it will, and it will be devastating to poor individuals. But I think more so, I think it's really engendering a issue of social cohesion. It's destroying social cohesion. It's
Yeah.
creating an us versus them mentality that seems to be like, oh, well, if you're not on my side, I have every reason to hold you accountable. And now I can be self-righteous and try to go after and destroy your life.
Yeah,
So for
that's
richer
the bigger
individuals,
piece.
they'll be able to run away from it.
Yeah, I think that's the bigger piece, regardless of how far it'll go from cancel culture or whether Joe's protected and this guy's not. The key is it softens and kind of weakens your moral standing and makes it easier to attack people for others. So if I can come after you and say you have less of a right to speak to some other group, okay, we can agree or disagree. Yes, let's get some more black voices in here, like the mayor of Chicago said. We can talk about that if you want. But then it goes from there to, well, maybe you should just not be able to do anything. Or maybe you have less value than a, maybe it's okay to punch that guy in the face. So
Yeah.
not every, but you will have some people who will keep taking new levels with it, right? They'll just say, well, those are the people that white men are the guys, too many of them, we should do this. We should not allow them faces. But then how far can we go? And I think it may go further than just saying, let the black people talk. Anybody
Yeah.
want to have the last word?
I'll take it if I can.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it definitely will be more than just let the black people talk. Because I mean, look at the argument of multiracial whiteness. So a black person who doesn't have the right opinion can immediately be said, "Oh, you're white. You're capping for white supremacy," and just completely invalidate them. And it's a way of just destroying conversation.
So we're sticking with free speech, but I want to switch to the other side. So recently, Nikole Hannah-Jones was all ready to get tenure at UNC, and obviously the story is still developing, but they're saying that her tenure is being pulled because of conservative backlash, and that some people are saying it's because of political reason. And I find it interesting, though, uh, to note that there are some conservatives, a lot of libertarian and center right people who are defending her, saying, I hate her, disagree with what she believes and what she stands for. But if we start again canceling or not giving tenure because of their political views, then it's a slippery slope. I have my opinions, but I want to hear yours first. I'm going to go to Will second because he tweeted something that I liked and I put it up. But Sasha, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I don't know specifically whether she should have gotten tenure, so I can't speak to that. I do think that academia is completely politicized. I think it's actually disgraceful, the state of academia right now. And something that I was thinking about was this professor, if you can't get tenure because you're politically in the wrong, then this makes me think about this particular professor named Grace Lavery, who's an English literature professor at UC Berkeley. And she's a transgender woman, and she tweeted basically encouraging to burn a book, this book called Irreversible Damage by Abigail Shrier. It's about the whole trans issue.
Yep.
And I just think that is so wildly unprofessional and inappropriate for a professor to encourage that and then claim, oh, it was just a joke. So for people to say that this was politicized, it's like, well, yeah, academia is really politicized right now, and it's a problem. I also think that the framing of the issue with, is it Nikole Hannah-Jones?
Yes.
Is, like in the New York Times, they reported it that it's just conservatives who have a problem with her and the 1619 Project. They didn't even mention that there are any other critiques of it, but there's the World Socialist website that I think did a really big takedown of her project. And so there was this hard left socialist critique, and the New York Times just completely leaves that out because that doesn't fit their narrative. And they don't want people to start having heterodox opinions on the left. So I think that's part of the issue as well.
Will?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one, actually, because, first of all, I'll get into the bigger issue in a second. First, the whole thing with Nikole Hannah-Jones being proposed as a tenured professor was due to the fact that she's this controversial woke figure. That's the only reason that happened. I don't have any particular hate for NHJ, although we've gone back and forth online. But I mean, like, she doesn't have a PhD that I know of. I mean, I don't think she has a ton of research publications outside of 1619. 1619 did win a Pulitzer, but that's journalism, and that's also been wildly attacked. I mean, people have compared that to Walter Duranty and so on. I mean, people have pointed out basic factual mistakes, like the argument that the Revolutionary War was fought to preserve slavery. We don't need to go through all of them, but like the Project's fact checker wrote an article about it that was headlined something like "My boss ignored me." Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up though is that Nikole Hannah-Jones was in contention for like this top 30 academic job because she's this edgy, feminist, woke public writer. Right. So it's kind of corny to say, well, how dare people bring politics into this? Like, there aren't a bunch of New York Times reporters with bachelor's or master's degrees that are made like tenured chairs at colleges. So first of all, it was really understandable that politics was going to be involved in this whole process. I mean, Nikole Hannah-Jones would be being completely disingenuous. She'd be lying if she said, no, I didn't expect any of this, Affirmative action doesn't come into play in college hiring, politics doesn't come into play. The real question, I think, and this is kind of what I was getting at with the Joe Rogan thing, is how conservatives and centrists should respond to cancel culture. And I'd actually like to hear what you guys say. I personally have kind of a competitor's attitude to like this, like, go get them back. But I mean, for months, for years, everyone on the right has been complaining every time someone got fired for often occasionally genuinely racist stuff. And I agree that that's a legitimate point of complaint. You have free speech if you're a tenured academic. But now, when we see people on the left that are getting put in some of these positions, NHJ is the obvious example, you're seeing more conservatives say, well, okay, let's kind of go truth revolt on them. Let's take the media matters strategy and flip that because there are more of us. And the worry there is that what you'll end up with is a society where no one gets to talk.
Yeah.
Like Victorian England, where people pretended that clitorises didn't exist. Like there were just all these things that were off limits. Like you couldn't talk about sex, you couldn't talk about certain types of violence. Are we going to get in there today as conservatives start backlashing? What does the panel think? Again, I don't have the most moral attitude toward this. Like, I wouldn't really have a problem if the young Republicans were like, hell no. If Ward Churchill was proposed as a professor or something. But what do you guys think?
Well, I think that
Yeah.
yeah, you're right on all points. I think you have if both sides are canceling, then everybody's canceled. Then everything's racist, then everybody's canceled. We're all flawed, and we're gonna piss somebody off. But
Real talk though, you just won't be able to talk.
right, and
Like white guys will complain about this show by like episode 8.
yeah,
You know, and then there's nothing on the air.
right. No, really. But the thing about Nikole Hannah-Jones is interesting though, because you make a good point about. I was going to talk about your tweet because it spoke to
Oh.
something else. But what you just said is just as good because you're saying, how can you say, because you're not saying she should be canceled in the sense that I'm a conservative, she's a liberal, ha ha, she's getting her comeuppance. You're saying, well, wait a minute, you got considered because of politics, and Sasha just said it's ugly that it's true, but she admitted that it's a fact that all these schools, all the college campuses are political now. So everything's political, everything's based on politics considered because of politics, but then when politics brings you down, it's not fair because it's politics. That just simply doesn't make sense, right? So I think it's all situational. Like I think the girl from Teen Vogue getting canceled was silly. There's a woman
Sure.
who was a supervisor or on the school board in San Francisco who tweeted some supposedly anti-Asian stuff on her side, even though she was crazy. I was like, one, it's not, it's different being black sometimes because what she tweeted didn't seem racist to me. It seemed like typical black speak. She was like, Asians get to do better in society because white people look at them differently and don't look at them the way they look at blacks. They look at them like Asians, almost like they're like whites, like they're a different class of minority. Not fair. It's not a nice thing to say, but it's not completely racist. It's not like go kill Asians. I'm like, you want to fire her for saying that? What 80% of black people say all the time is silly. But this is different. I'm like, how about I'm against her being getting tenure because she lied? How about that as an option, right? Or like you say, you know, considering her on the same merit basis that you do every other tenured professor, so she should never have been in the position. But I don't think that the right to go around gleefully saying that the left is getting canceled. Shemeka.
Well, I was gonna say that this evening the university came out and said that she was denied tenure because she didn't have a traditional academic background. So that's
Yeah,
what
she
the
doesn't.
university stance
Oh well,
is.
let's go
They
back
just
there.
came
So
out
who
and
said
said,
it was politics though? Because all the articles I said she was refused tenure either because conservatives complained or because of politics. But no one ever said it was because because you don't have a PhD.
right. So that was
Yeah,
the. I think the Hill put that out this evening that they got a comment from the university, and that's what the university said.
She can't say it's not true.
Right.
Right.
So
with a lot of this stuff, it's a combination though. Like if they wanted to if they wanted to get more black faculty that people have heard of by hiring Colin Powell, nobody would have cared. The reality was that Nikole Hannah-Jones didn't have the normal qualifications for the job and was controversial. So people decided
right.
to point this out and say, well, why would we allow this? Why would we lower the standards, quote unquote, for someone we don't like? That's how politics came into play.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I mean, to me.
Nasim?
Okay. Well, I'll say this. I would say that they need to be consistent. Her work, the 1619 Project, is rather spurious. I mean, it's riddled with inaccuracies, and she said it was political. She first said this was our real founding, and then had to backtrack on it, so that's bad. Second, this is the same woman who back in the 90s wrote an article calling white people savages. And if you're going to sit there and say that people are to be respectful and go back and look at people's history, like as that Teen Vogue woman was fired, why would you give a professor, a woman who's outright stated that her whole work should be about portraying whites as savages? Why would you give her a job?
And if you're white,
Her,
why would you give her a job? You just called me a savage.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me on that end. And then finally, I mean, what has she done other than she's a journalist? What has she done to actually get that status? Like, I think that's more of the scandal, really. Why would you give a journalist a tenured position as a professor when she has never done that work in her life? It seems like academia just does not have any form of prestige anymore. I mean, this just lowers it completely, in my opinion.
Sasha?
I just realized I better not try to go any further than where I am right now, because if they go and look at some of the things that I've said, I would be fired before I can even get in the door.
Probably just on Cut the Bull. Probably just on this episode of Cut the Bull.
Not,
Exactly.
What was the
Well,
song again?
sometimes
Don't you
it's
do it.
better
Sasha.
to,
probably
Sometimes
not
it's
by
better to preemptively
probably not by a
cancel.
historically black college. We haven't been infected with the political correctness yet.
Right.
But I could imagine UNC listening to the Lil Nas X quote though. That cisgender woman
Right.
mocking us.
Right.
Sasha, did
Yeah.
you wanna
Or
say
maybe
something?
I'll get in trouble for saying, we should cook our own shrimp fried rice in only 10 minutes. I tweeted that and I made sure that I didn't put the S on minutes. But, hey,
Stop AAPI hate.
Oh my God. Sasha, you got
hurry up
anything
and
else?
buy.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say sometimes it's better to just be really problematic out front, and then you don't get yourself into situations where you'll later be canceled.
But her problematic is what got her in the status to get to the position in the first place. Without problematic, she
Yeah.
wouldn't even be there.
You're talking about Nikole Hannah-Jones,
Right. Oh,
Well,
you
I
were
was
talking,
talking about
what, you were
Shemeka.
talking about Shemeka.
Yes.
Criticizing our co-host.
No, I was saying that as a positive.
Right,
you know,
right.
it's better to just be like, hey, this is me. I'm not politically correct, so
Right.
cancel me. And then they don't have those skeletons in the closet where they can try to shame you into doing an apology.
Right.
That's actually my approach, like real talk. Like I'm kind of a jackass bro who happens to be black. Like everyone can follow me on Twitter. I've written books with titles like Taboo. So I really do think, for most of the panel here, probably there's very little chance of us being offered, a position with the Brookings Institute or something. So that not trying to be scared your whole life and missing by just a half step is a strategy I'd advise.
Yeah, I agree.
So, do you all remember there was another one I remember. I said, since we were on that, do you want to talk the last one? I almost forgot, but now I remember. You want to talk briefly? I got like another 5 minutes before we move to the next topic. You want to talk about the wonderful mayor of Chicago, Illinois, and the story of her? You said yes. Mika, tell everybody what Mayor Lightfoot decided to do this week.
Well, she only wants to, I guess, answer questions from reporters or journalists that are black or brown. I guess that's what, the story is. And I was wondering, though, if she would take any questions from Beetlejuice, because he's of her kind as well. So I thought it was very interesting. And now people are, saying, what if a white mayor had said this? How would, everyone take it? But I wanted to talk about it only because I'm like, girl, I could think of a lot of characters that could get in on that if you only want to talk to people that look like you.
Ooh. Well, I know you got opinions, but I think I want to say, all right, we're going to be real because we keep it real. This is Cut the Bull. Shemeka's keeping it naked. So she said that she only wants to black and brown journalists. Am I wrong? North Carolina, well, Chicago, you grew up in the same area. Do black people go around saying black and brown? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just
No.
being real.
Nope.
Do black people say black and
No.
brown?
Hell
No.
no. Black
I hate
normal
it.
normal brothers and sisters in Chicago, normal black people would never say anything in her text about this like AAPI, which I said jokingly earlier. I think she said Mina, like the Middle Eastern semi-white category, like Native Hawaiian. Like, there aren't a lot of people sitting in a barbershop like, yeah, I only mess with blacks and Native Hawaiians. That's not real. But it's just this woke nonsense over the top again. I actually have practical questions about this combination of like wokeness and old school racism. Like, where does it go? Like, for looking at least three of the people on the panel, myself, Nasim, maybe Sasha, like, who counts as white? I mean, like, would an Arab guy qualify, or would she? I mean, that may be the most oppressed group in the country in some years.
Ooh.
Like, would
That's
they
what
be
they
cut
do.
out?
When you immigrate here, you're whatever you are, and then 2 years later, you become white.
Ooh, I got to answer this.
You do.
It's
I
not
gotta
like
answer
white racists think that way.
Right.
I got to answer this
I
as
worked
the
at-
Arab
We got to
people.
let Nasim in. Nasim, go ahead.
Nasim may know.
Okay,
He's
so
got the
traditionally speaking, Arabs are counted as white because we're part of the,
Yes.
in America. We view Arabs, since they're Caucasians, all Arabs are listed as white. Now, since the it was back like in 2012, there started to be this argument that Arabs shouldn't be counted as white, which is really weird because both Jews and Arabs are Semites. They're both the same. They're both in the same ethnic group, so they're already constituting Jews as whites. So if Jews are whites, then how is it that Arabs are not whites?
Objection to the court. Objection. But it depends on when you're going back, because in the 1800s they weren't white, and the Irish weren't white. They all graduated to be white. They weren't white before, they became white, and now they're white. So you're right about the whole,
Yeah.
how can you say Jews are white and not saying Arabs, right? But then we change. This stuff is fluid all the time. We were like, we don't want those Irish people in. They're not like us. We don't want
I
those
feel-
Italians. They're not like us until they graduate to being white. And so now the
Yeah.
Asians have graduated to being white. The only people who can't graduate to being white are black folk.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and
because
I
whites are-
What about
Hispanics are
Indians?
white.
Like, I don't know about
Yeah.
that. Like,
yeah.
but I mean,
I feel like
Hispanics are white. I worked at
No.
a school, and we had to put Hispanics down as being white. So
Or non-white Hispanic. Yeah.
only
white or not.
people that were black were black.
yeah,
I feel
it's,
like-
Were white, and then
it's actually
that's what we had to, how we registered the kids.
so just to interject
that's
here.
actually a really
I-
important point.
I feel like
Nasim.
once they dub us as a like non-white group, it feels like that's where liberals will then begin to like elevate certain people of that minority class as like racial managers. That's what I feel like it's more about. And it might sound really weird to say that, but if you look at it, the minute you're dubbed as a minority, liberals immediately go in, find the people who are like of their viewpoint amongst your ethnic group, and then raise them up as if they're the people who speak for you, which is something you don't see that white people have a sort of like bullshit shield against. Oh, there's no like representative for white people, but there's an attempt to make representative for blacks. There's now an attempt to make representatives for Arabs, and so forth. And I think that's really dangerous.
Well, I wanted to before I go to Sasha, I wanted to mention that I was half joking, but it's serious because it was mostly for Sasha and Nasim and the listeners out there who are non-black, because most people don't say this stuff, and we're supposed to be being real, and black folks just don't talk like that. So to hear these people,
We
this black woman getting on there talking about, I only want to interview black and browns. First of all, if you were true pro-black trying to fight what's going on, the supposed systemic problems with racism against black people, you would never mention brown out of your mouth, number one. Number two,
Exactly.
will she allow her wife to ask a question? Sasha? You don't have to answer that question.
Is her wife white?
Yes, but
Yeah.
you don't have to. Of course, wait, stop, Sasha, stop. Let's go back. Have you not noticed the pattern that every extremely woke black person has a non-black person on their arm? Did you not know that? Did you not know
It's
that?
not,
Did you
it's
not
not
know?
just black people. Like
That
AOC,
is so
Ilhan
true.
Omar, it is 100%. Like the most radical
John
upper-class
Legend.
college-educated women are
Don
almost,
Lemon.
and men are almost invariably in
Don
interracial
Lemon.
relationships. Don Lemon is the classic example, yeah.
I'm scared
So
of
what's
white
their
men,
angle here?
except for the man that lives
Right.
in my house. Yeah,
That's
it's crazy.
interesting.
But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, it reminds me of the whole Latinx thing. Like most Latino people that I know, they think it's ridiculous, and it's like woke white people or whoever woke people of any race who try to tell them that they should use it, and it's like something that's less offensive to use Latinx. And something kind of funny, before I got canceled and fired from my job, I was in the literary industry, which is extremely liberal and woke. And this publishing house that I interned at, they had to restock an entire order of a book because it was like supposed to say Chicanx, and they spelled it wrong on the cover. So these people are just like making everything so much harder for themselves with these weird made up words. But yeah, to the question of who counts as white, it's something that I sometimes think about Eastern Europe, because that's where my family's from, and we're Jews from Eastern Europe. And just this concept of whiteness, it doesn't apply in the same way, like Jews were not considered ethnically part of the larger group. They weren't considered nationally part of the country that they lived in. So my ancestors who came from Lithuania, they would never have been considered Lithuanian because they were Jews. So it just, this construct, it doesn't really apply to all cases. And I feel like they're really trying to put it as a blanket generalization where everybody has to adhere to this. And it's just more complex than that.
And I had a black liberal who's not woke, so he makes common sense, say, so if you, now we're not talking about green. If you're talking about a seasoned veteran, journalist who went to journalism school, who worked their way up, did the crappy jobs, got good at their craft, you put them in the room, shouldn't they be asking the mayor the same questions? And I was like, that's a really good point. I mean, so it's almost like being racist against black again, and saying that white people have different concerns. They're concerned about crime and taxes and corruption and the quality of life. And blacks are concerned by, guess what? The same things. So they actually act as if we interviewed a black person, the black person would ask her different questions if the whole reason they're there is because they're black. So they know now I'm forced to ask some woke Ebony Jet magazine questions. Yes. But in theory, if you're, a true journalist, you're going to ask the questions, you're going to be trying to win the next Pulitzer. You're going to be trying to find some corruption. You're going to do the same thing anybody else is going to do. But
one of the things that really annoyed me about Robin DiAngelo, you guys know her white fragility person, is she made this point that we should reject the concept that we all bleed under the skin. Like, we should reject the concept that we're all fundamentally the same. She says this is, a spiritual concept, but we don't live in the spiritual plane and we can't achieve that. So we shouldn't think of things like that. And I just thought that's so counter to every kind of idea of equality and respect for people. And it's like you're saying, Charles, like, people do have the same basic issues and the same concerns regardless of what group they're in. So
it's also counter to science, because I think if they cut you and Will, both of you would bleed.
Absolutely.
This would be a little browner than yours, but still red-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
all that stuff is silly.
I think it's disgraceful that, like, I can remember back in the 90s, we were talking about, like, colorblind. I don't know if any of you remember the commercials where they would show, like, an Asian person and they would say, hey, just because they're Asian doesn't mean they know martial arts. Yet now you can hear, like, in movies, you can hear them saying that, a white guy playing a martial artist is wrong. It should have been casted by an Asian guy. If you guys don't remember
because apparently now it means they know martial arts.
Yes, we're going back and we're actually stereotyping people and getting away with it because it's coming from liberals.
Well, I'm going to move to your next topic, though.
Okay.
Because you all brought it up. Sasha said you all wanted to talk about it. I thought it was really fascinating, because we talk about the free market and capitalism all the time, and for whatever reason, it's supported, but mostly on the right, decried on the left, and on the far by some liberals, and on the far left, but it's the reason why racism exists. Is that evil? The 1619 Project has a whole essay about it, calling it, what did they call it? It was something basically akin to racist and evil, and it's this evil American capital is so bad, and you can never get fairness or move up this evil capital. So when I asked you all to come on, and I said, tell me what you want to talk about, Sasha wanted to say, is capitalism conservative? So tell me what your premise is.
This is Nasim's issue, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Yeah, so my viewpoint on this is, and we're seeing it right now in practice, is when you let capitalism be unfettered, all you're saying is those who have the most power in that system use that power to go after whoever they don't like. I mean, that's what we're seeing with big tech. They're going and saying, hey, this is our values here. And if the people's values don't comport to that, will make their values comport to it, will affect their jobs, will fire them, will censor them on the internet and all that. And the other thing is if you look at it, unfettered capitalism has been absolutely devastating to the family. Because if you look at United States, you look at how since the 80s, we basically unleashed the bull. And since the 80s, the family structure has completely collapsed. I mean, what's the divorce rate now? 50%? What's the, what is it? The birth rate has declined, horrifically. And then you have like Mitt Romney and Holly wanting to do a pro-family, what is it? Social program.
Money to incentivize them to have to get married,
have kids.
Right?
And what was the reply from the right? Was a Cato Institute libertarian saying you can't do that? The women will work less. There'll be less productivity. As if having a child and raising that child is a luxury, something that, well, you don't have to worry about that. Go hire somebody to deal with your kid. You need to work. Like, where did that come from? Like, it makes no sense. You would think that people would be fine, like, oh, this guy, if they make enough money and they can raise their kid, would you really think, oh, well, they need to work more, not less, because their child should come second to their work? Is that conservatism for me used to mean like it was social. It was the family is the bedrock of society. Now the argument is the economy is the bedrock of society, and families and whatnot serve it. And that's all I'm hearing is it's basically like the libertarians won, and they made American conservatism into nothing but libertarianism.
So I guess my first thing is going to be, but is that conservatism that's doing that, or is that capitalism that's doing that? I mean, because we can talk about what we agree or disagree with the points, the issues that you say societies has, but it sounds like you're saying those issues are because of capitalism, which I question. But Will looks like he wants to jump through the screen, so I better let Will go.
Yeah, go.
I mean, well, first of all, I thought that was a pretty good analysis in many ways, but like, I could go into a whole long thing about like being multivariate and statistical methods and so on, which would bore everyone listening to this half to death, although Nasim would probably break it down with me. But basically, I don't think the fact that fatherlessness has increased since the 60s is due to capitalism.
Right. It wasn't the 80s, it was the 60s, right.
Yeah, it went up in the 80s too, but there's the intervening variable of mass welfare. I mean, we started the Great Society in 64, enhanced it in 68, if I have that correct. In the 80s, for all Reagan's talk, I mean, government expanded a little more as he and Tip O'Neill went back and forth. So it's really difficult to argue that sort of the government is shrinking and we're becoming more radically capitalist, and that's why these families are collapsing. I mean, the reality is that the government has greatly increased in size under not only, Mr. Obama and Mr. Carter, but also Mr. Bush and Mr. Trump. I mean, that's just a reality. The government's 15 times the size it used to be. And most of that is welfare. It's Social Security, defined broadly. But like Medicare, Medicaid, SSID.
Some kind of social service, right.
But here's the thing. This is what I would say is if you look at the way the American culture has gone through capitalism enables people to, not just climb the ladder and get a material success, it also creates a culture of all is permissive because it has to sell. It has to continue to sell.
That's not really necessarily this is an interesting analysis. I guess my take on all of what Nasim just said would be capitalism isn't inherently right or left. The question is how much capitalism you have. So I'm a capitalist, I'm a businessman, but I don't think you should be able to sell slaves. So like everyone except like if you ever, when my boys were in the military in Afghanistan, if you go to the Kasbah, I mean the large open market, you can buy like an AK-47 with the old Soviet grease on it. You can buy a small boy. The term is bakabazi, like there's a pretty active slave trade, and so on down the line. And obviously, we had a lot of these same vices ourselves until like 100 plus years ago. But the reality is that's pure capitalism, like the agora, the village market. virtually everyone opposes that. I have to say, like on the serious right. Like nobody thinks you should be able to sell raw opium in Walmart. Like the kind of crap you could get just traveling through any LDC country. But the flip side is, if you have no capitalism, if you have 100% state control of means of production,
Yeah.
that is the flip side that's extremely far on the left. And I think in the center left, center right debate, you're talking more like, are taxes going to be 33%? Then are we going to bring back slavery? So yeah, like the promotion by capitalism, last sentence, of kind of like have fun, rave culture, fourth wave feminism, yeah, that messed with the family. But so did the promotion from the left of welfare, because you need a way to support them kids.
Yeah, Nasim,
there's
I
no
want to say
doubt on
something
that.
real quick.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me say something real quick. I'm gonna go back to you to reply, and then I want the ladies to respond. I think the issue is, and it's interesting. That's why I think this is a great topic, because kind of like Will, I don't disagree. Well, I don't disagree at all with the problems you say society has, because I mean, you're telling the truth, and they're real problems. I think the concern that he may have, and the concern I definitely have, is tied to capitalism, because I think the problem, and even the way you describe it, the problem is extreme, you know, extremes of human nature. It could be greed, it could be, power or whatever. And you have that in every society. You had it when you had monarchs, you had it when you had people beating each other with clubs, you have it with capitalism. So it's not the fact that the capitalism allows people to move up the ladder. It's the fact that Jeff Bezos got so rich and Bill Gates got so rich, he can control how the vaccine gets distributed.
Yeah.
Right, but that's not capitalism. That's the oligarchy, right? That's the wealthy few being able to pull strings. And you also have to. Everything has good and bad. So you also. But last thing is you have to look at the balance, right? So you have to take what does capitalism give us, and then what problems do you think it caused, and what's the balance? So the fact that we have far fewer people living in abject poverty, living on the street on hills. I mean, our homeless problem is a problem, but we don't have third world country homeless problems, and our poor don't live like the poor in those other countries because of capitalism. So does the capitalism bring in greed and all these other things? True, but we'd have to give up the middle class in order to give up Jeff Bezos.
Well, I don't think we have to go far into like the communist ideals of like, oh, let's have the government own the means of production and whatnot. There's definitely a good argument over whether or not certain critical industries should be nationalized. I mean, we just had some of our defense contractors get caught, selling our secrets to China. But the issue here is, as we can see from the liberal side, like you have the rise of saying prostitution is actually sex work. Now, I think everyone here can agree that prostitution is not a form of legitimate work. I don't
really agree with that. Like,
that's a contentious one.
I do not.
If you're not being pimped, if you consensually want to be a hooker, a sex worker, I have no problem with that.
Except that most people aren't doing it on their free will. If it's of their free will,
that's the real feminist issue there. That like 91% of sex workers, last I saw, are not free to leave at any time. I mean, that is the issue.
And see, from the social conservative viewpoint, the argument against pornography and sex work is that you're selling the dignity of women. And yes, you could say, well, these people are doing this because they are of their free will, but it's still a question of whether or not you want, because there is a slippery slope here. The minute you say, okay, well, these people can do it, look at the new stuff that's coming up from the left side, where you have the rise of kinks, where guys are now on OnlyFans beating the shit out of women. While and this was a guy known as was Elijah Black, beating the shit out of women and having over 165,000 people watching him beat up his girlfriend and another woman before fucking them. And that's just, in the United States, we actually have laws that say you can't do that. Women cannot consent to being beaten.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, like, wouldn't any of the regulations on snuff codes or, like, violence porn block that? Like, other than child pornography, that's the only really illegal type of porn, except maybe animals. So, but again, this is where...
you're blaming it on capitalism.
I'm pretty sure that there are perverts in communist societies. Like,
Well-
bro, I'm pretty sure that rates of rape, unfortunately, are very similar across most countries. The only question is whether in the USA, people that cross that line can sometimes make money. But that again gets into what I think Nasim, and I obviously we should hear what the female
That's what I'm gonna
panelists
say,
have to
yes.
say.
Yeah.
But last line though, this is the one thing that me and Nasim agreed on. You can set rules. Like capitalism doesn't mean you have a slave market.
Yeah.
It just means the government doesn't own the means of production.
I think I'll just say this. I think me and Wilford both agree that there should be some sort of regulations and whatnot and laws to ensure people don't use the market to be abusive.
Yes, you
Yes.
can't make snuff films. I agree with that law.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not even saying that as
And
a
I'm-
joke. I totally agree. Take
Yeah,
that guy down.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on something else. I'll tell you after Shemeka and Sasha go. Shemeka.
Boom.
Well, gosh, y'all covered so much, right? So we went from Leave It to Beaver.
The snuff
I feel
films.
like housewife to sex workers. Like it was all over the place. But so I feel like there's a couple things. I do think that women that say, "Hey, this is what I want to do," prostitution or whatever, it is work. You know, if you do it right. But I was a former stripper. Nobody forced me to do it. It was what I wanted to do. I thought, hey, let me make this quick cash. Let me make money. I'm in school. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. So I don't have an issue with women who decide by their own free will that they want to get into that type of, job or career or whatever you want to call it. I do not, though, agree with, people that are being trafficked or, have pimps or whatever and they can't get out. I think that's wrong. And so we do have to find a balance there and figure out, how to protect those women. Coming to families, when we talk about, I guess, capitalism, for me, I was a housewife. And so I appreciate capitalism. I feel like greed sometimes or trying to keep up with the Joneses is why people maybe have less kids or feel like, women have to be out in the workforce. For us, we had 3. I stayed home, and that's what was best for my family. So I think it's all about, what the family decides to do. I would never be against capitalism. If you want to keep up with the Joneses, of course, that's what you're going to do, and you're not going to be focused on your family as a woman. I personally believe in traditional gender roles, and I feel like women should take care of the home.
Sasha.
Well, my take on the whole prostitution pornography thing is that because of the, it's a billion dollar industry, the sex industry here in the US, and I do think that it's also created a culture of incentivizing young women to go into this or just to live their lives like this. OnlyFans has become so ubiquitous almost. I find it quite disturbing that it's normalized. Because I do think, like Shemeka said, for some women, this is valid for them, this works for them. But as what other people said, for the majority of women in this industry, it doesn't. They're poor, they don't want to be there, they're being abused in some capacity or manipulated. And the money itself is a coercive factor, so it gets really tricky. And I think, unfortunately, we see, honestly, a whole generation of girls kind of being brought up in this overly sexualized society where they feel that they are commodified and that it's actually a marker of success if they can, go on OnlyFans and bring in money. And to me, that's a problem. I think that's really devaluing to women. And so I do see that as a capitalist issue as well. And then, if we're going to take it back to the whole capitalist discussion, one thing that Nasim and I have talked about that we're going to be covering on our podcast, The Underground, is big tech and big tech monopolies, right? So I'm curious what you guys would say to that, the question of, what do we do now with these tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, and they've taken over all the public discourse and dialogue. assumed the power to kick the president off of Twitter. You know what I mean? They've taken so much power over speech. And it does seem to have to do with the fact that in our current capitalist system, if you are a monopoly, if you are an oligarch, you can gain more power even than the government. So
Well,
I wonder what you guys would say to that.
I think it's important that you mention the word again, oligarch, because I don't think it's the same. My only challenge to Nasim is he talked about capitalism, and I just don't think that I don't consider that capitalism, right? You're talking about a kind of a specific set of circumstances there with the tech company. They are a problem in a sense. It's a rough one for me. I'd love to hear what Shemeka and Will have to say about it. I don't like censoring, um, and at the same time, while I see that they have too much power and they're a problem, I think we gave them the power, right? By, checking all the boxes and signing on everything because we like their shiny toys, but by saying that that it's okay that they do. So one good example is I was going to be. It's kind of segues to the other thing that I was, and I'll let you all tell me your thoughts. But I said I was going to say something else I agree with him about. It's talking about there's certain things that the government should have control over. And on an upcoming show, I think it's not this Sunday, next Sunday, I'm interviewing Peter Pry, who's the executive director of the EMP task force on national security. And we're talking about cyber attacks and all this other possible things coming down. And one of the things I mentioned to him is, didn't we get to the point that the government, created the internet? The government used to run all these things. And now we have so many private companies that do it for us. Like we talk about energy. We talked to just the pipeline that was just suffered from the ransomware. Well, we talk about these whether you're talking about environmental and wind and solar things, or whether you're a coal guy. It doesn't matter. All those companies are owned by private companies, right? All the Duke and Exelon and all those all private companies. But even if you say, but the government has a hand in it, my thing was the software is all big tech software. So the machines that they run at the water plant, at the gas plant, at the oil plant, all the software that they use to control the valve are Microsoft, right? So you still have this. So, but I'm in agreement with you, Nasim, that that's a problem. I just don't call that capitalism in its rarest sense, right? This is people who have gotten so big and got their tentacles in so deep that they can just go into the office and slap the president and say, "Shut up, you need me," and then they say, "Yes, sir, Mr. Bezos." So I wouldn't decry all of capitalism because of that, but it is. I'm just saying it is a problem because they've gotten too big for the britches. I don't know what we do. Before you answer, she wanted to know what the panel thinks, so I want Will and Shemeka to say what they think about the big tech companies.
To me, I think there is a compromise here, which is that we need clear, objective standards on a lot of this stuff. This is my feeling on cancel culture, too, honestly. Like, we keep hearing, well, you can't tell a private company what to do. But the problem here is that Facebook, Twitter, all these players clearly have a lot of biases and clearly don't have a set rule for what will get you kicked offline. I mean, there have been a lot of, if you're an internet kid, if you're in that Reddit, 4chan, etc. culture, I'm not because I'm past 18. But I mean, if you look at a lot of these discussions and debates, like there have been situations that are quite famous, like Milo Yiannopoulos versus Leslie Jones, where literally two people are going back and forth. It gets a little ugly. Only one's removed, and it's usually the one on the right. That's happened dozens of times. And you've seen, whether you want to support these people in any way at all, but the argument that there's no censorship, like you've seen at different times, everyone from Chapo Trap, in terms of people on the left that might be worth listening to, Cop Block, You Old Blacks Trillions, everyone from them over to like Laura Loomer, Milo, the Nation of Islam, like the original libertarian page. I mean, just all of Prison Planet, like massive sites just deplatformed. I guess what I'm saying with this is there's no standard. There's no objective standard that allows the Ayatollah to be on Twitter, but not like a funny internet troll. So, I mean, I think my threat to these guys, if I were the government, the people with the guns in the banks, would be like, you need to have a 2-page code of rules that explains exactly what the policies are. What can you say, can you not say, and then people can decide whether or not to use your site. Right. There also needs to be some pressure, last line, on illegal collusion, I think. Like when you see this shit, like Donald Trump on the same day, like Jane went to the gym and told me he's been removed from the cycle thing, Peloton. Like you can't mention terms like 4 more years on Peloton, and like the first family's account was deleted. Like when you see people gone from Twitter, Facebook, Insta, so on, all in the same day, you know what's up. We've all been in business. We've made calls. This is just that happening at a much higher level. So, I mean, enough with that crap. Like, you can't just get rid of Parler, make them post their actual rules, like what is hate speech. I think that's a good starting point. And that's also how I feel about cancel culture, kind of looping it back to the start. Like, I don't have a problem with a college having a policy against racism that would ban, like, IQ hereditarianism and hard CRT. Like, I think it's stupid, but that's something probably 80% of people would agree with. But you can't just out of nowhere grab people and say, well, you violated Rule X23, which is what's really been happening.
Right. Well, we just hit an hour. Nasim and Sasha, you want to tell us about the Underground Podcast, what it's about, what you do, where to find it, and when it airs?
Sure. Thank you. So, yeah, we've just begun the Underground Podcast and show on YouTube. You can find it on plebity.org. It's plebity.org. And so we have one episode out so far all about white privilege, and we kind of deconstruct Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi. And we are moving forward. We don't have a fully set schedule yet, so for people, please check in on plebity.org or on our YouTube channel, Plebity. And we're going to be talking about geopolitical issues. We're going to be talking about wokeness. We ourselves are not liberal. I think that I'm kind of a politically homeless leftist or an independent or something like that. I'll let Nasim speak for himself, but we have a really independent view, I think kind of an alternative view, and we're going to be exploring a lot of different issues through that.
Sounds cool. And you want to tell the people about Plebity?
Yes. So I started working on Plebity full-time after I got fired last summer from a literary agency for my tweets. And we're a media organization. We have podcast videos. I also do I interview people on my channel as well. And we talk a lot about the gender issues, the gender wars, which is what I got fired over. But we also talk about other issues. We talk about other issues of wokeness as well as just larger societal issues. And then one thing that's really important to us that I want to make sure your listeners are aware of is that we have the Free Speech Fund. So this is a community basically on Patreon where you can come join us. And the fund is for people who've been fired or otherwise materially severely punished for their speech. So we give grants to people who've had that happen. So far we've given out a couple of grants to people who've either been fired or been targeted by activists in an extreme way that in some way materially affected their life. So we're really excited about that. We have money that we want to give away to people. If you're listening to this and you yourself have been canceled, please think about coming to our site and maybe applying for our fund.
That is so awesome. I'm so glad you joined us. And Shemeka, you should start practicing. You know I'm gonna come to you and see if you have any last words.
Well, first of all, when she said come to our site, I heard get money. So I was thinking, what's the name of that site again?
If you get canceled, we will give you money, Shemeka.
Oh, she probably will get canceled. So
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow after this show. Well, yeah, it's been.
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, go.
I'm good.
You sure?
No, I'm good.
You just want some
I'm
money.
good.
I'll
Yes.
talk to Sasha and get you some money. But it's been great having you all on, Nasim and Sasha. Hope you all come back and listen to that podcast, The Underground. And I'd like to have Sasha back to talk about, have Shemeka and her teach us about, me and Will, about feminism, and Nasim, so we can kind of get into more capitalism stuff. I like that.
Yes.
And yeah, I look forward to it. I appreciate you. Thank you all for watching, listening to this episode of Cut the Floor. Catch you next week.
Thank you.
I'm saving the day. I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say.